Chapter 80 Enrollment. In the previous carriage, Yi Linger and Fan Ruo were talking. It's really troublesome. Yi Linger suddenly had some hesitation on her face, but is that person really Lord Fei's student? Looking very young. Fan Ruo smiled. I know, this doctor is always good to be old, but today, I just let him take a look. After all, Lord Fei's medical skills are admired even by the imperial doctors. Our family has some relationship with Lord Fei. There is no harm in letting him take a look. Yi Linger thought about it is also so. Lin family sister's consumption has never any doctor can come up with a real method. The palace had once passed Fei Jia. Who knows Fei Jia went to patrol the border and can't come back for a while. Today can find Fei Jia's student. It is also considered good luck. She thought about it and finally did not hold back and asked, Ruoro, I heard that your brother was sued yesterday. Fan Ruoro thought to herself, why are you asking this at this time? Amusingly, she replied, did they add another offense to my brother? Yi Linger coldly grunted, this time I admit your love, but for your brother, I'm not half good, manly man, even like a doe like, how others say how he does, do not know a little bit of their own opinions. Fan Ruoro Heart of Joy thought if his brother really have their own opinion, this marriage naturally not, then do not know who is not happy, but will not say anything, smiled and responded, our kind of status of people should have long been clear. A lot of things will not be able to do anything. But your brother is also too nonsensical, right? Obviously he is going to marry Sister Lin, but he actually still goes to sleep with flowers. Where does this make Sister Lin's face go? Yi Linger thought of these recent rumors, her anger rose to her heart, and she said hatefully, not only that, but he also beats people on the street, this kind of character. Ruoro, you don't get angry, tell me, if you were to marry someone like this, could it be that you'd be willing to do so? Fan Ruoro sighed and thought, what is there to be unwilling about? She turned and said, the so-called rumor stops at the wise man, what do you care about these things that people outside are chewing on? My elder brother is also not a person who is blindly unreasonable and flirts around. Yi Linger laughed coldly, not yet? Do you know how people in Kyoto have been calling your brother since yesterday? How do you call him? Fan Ruo opened her eyes wide and asked curiously. She did want to know how the public in Kyoto would view her distinctive elder brother. Seiyi's. That black boxer from the fan mansion. Yi Linger exasperatedly said, look at this, look at how others look at your brother. Fan Ruoro covered her mouth with a smile and said as well, did you know that my brother has a nickname? What? The Empress Dowager once said, miles of sadness often as a guest hit again? Fan Ruoro held back her laughter, miles of sadness, often a guest, isn't this nickname a bit long? Yi Linger knew that the other party was telling herself that the person called Fan Xian not only knew how to fight black fists, but also composed a good handful of poems. She hummed twice, and it was impossible for her to refute the opinion of the Empress Dowager in the palace, who obviously appreciated the poem composed by Fan Xian. The two carriages drove one after the other into a quiet courtyard not far from the palace, and outside the courtyard, it was obvious to see that there were many palace guards, with simple style but conveniently drawn short swords tied around their waists. Getting off the carriage, Yi Linger familiarly went inside, but unexpectedly was stopped by the guards at the door. Yi Linger curiously said, what's wrong? The guard said with difficulty, there is no harm for Miss Yi to go in. Yi Linger was furious and laughed, pulling Fan Ruoro's hand and said, this is the young lady of the Sananbo family, a greatly famous talent in the capital. She glared at Fan Ruoro, the sister who is a frequent guest of Miles Sad Autumn, can't she still go in? Who is Wanli Sorrowful Autumn's frequent guest? The Lord Squire's bowl of characters could recognize a pot, and was dumbfounded on the spot. Wanli's Sorrowful Autumn Chang's would go himself at this time, but hid behind Yi Linger's back and laughed bitterly. Yi Linger puffed and laughed, in a much better mood, explaining, today a doctor was invited to come and give sister a look, are you still stopping? The guard turned his head and saw the doctor whose face was a bit ugly and whose body was a bit hunched over, and in his heart, he thought, good guy, his own body is all screwed up like this, and he still dares to give the county princess a medical treatment? But this can't be said. After all, we have to give face to Miss Yi family. How many guards in this palace don't have more or less division relationship with Yi family? He said with a bitter smile, Miss Yi, if you give the adults a word earlier, I certainly do not dare to stop you, and will not stop this doctor, but today really cannot. You see that you invited this doctor and did not in the palace on the register, which went to cure, in case of cure a good or bad too. Fan Xian lowered his head, and was a bit anxious in his heart. He wouldn't be able to make a hard trip, but in the end, he wouldn't even be able to see Ms. Lin's face, so he would have to withdraw, wouldn't he? He didn't realize that this was the fruit he planted himself and the cause he got today. The last time he confusedly broke into the Qing temple and fought against the palace dictionary, the entire palace guards were scolded by Eunuch Hong and the chancellor, which is why the band is so tight today. What is this nonsense? This gentleman is a student of Lord Fei of the Supervisory Academy. Yi Linger glared at the guard. As soon as the guard heard the three words Lord Fei, he then looked at Fan Xian with a gaze that began to oil up in respect and silently took half a step back, but then thought of something and frowned. Lord Fei's student? How come it seems like I've never heard of it before? Yi Linger also thought of this, thinking that with Lord Fei's medical skills, his students should be very famous. How come she has never heard of them? She turned around suspiciously and glanced at Fan Xian. Fan Xian, however, was prepared for this and shook his head with a grim face, pulling out a waistplate from his pocket. The waistplate was the waistplate of the supervisory authority. No one could imitate it, or no one in the world's skilled craftsmen dared to imitate it, and it was still the one Fei Jia had given to Fan Xian before he left Tanyuzu when he was 6 years old. The guards took a look at the waistplate and identified the other party without difficulty, and then looking at the gloomy aura and waxy yellow color on the young man's face, they understood somewhat that this was indeed Lord Fei's student, and that it was hard not to have this ghostly appearance after being immersed in poison all year round. Since they had found a secured party that was responsible enough, the guards naturally let them go. The three of them walked into the quiet small courtyard. Along the road there were occasional flowers. A small stone road reached out from the flowers, leading to a small building deep in the courtyard. A maid invited the three upstairs, and then served tea. Fan Xian paid attention to each other's behavior, and found that this made every move between the extremely measured. Obviously in the palace has been trained for many years. After some more time, an old sister walked out and said with a slightly proud color, Miss Yi, you are here. Yi Linger obviously didn't like this old sister. Coldly grunting as an answer, she asked, where is sister? Miss is sleeping. I don't know what Miss Yi came for today. The old sister appeared to be standing respectfully, but her tone of voice was one of rejection. Fan Xian could not help but be a bit surprised, thinking to himself, what's this all about? Yi Linger didn't want to fight with this old woman today, and yelled, I've hired a good doctor for Sister Lin, so go and tell her that the doctor will come to see her once she's finished packing. Old sister glanced at Fan Xian, knowing that this was that doctor, and said coldly, you know the status of the young lady. Besides the imperial physician in the palace, who else is qualified to treat him? Yi Linger brought out Fan Xian's identity again, who knew that this old sister would not budge, and was much more difficult to deal with than the guards outside. Fan Xian didn't know about this royal rule nowadays, but all daughters who hadn't left the pavilion always had a whole bunch of grannies and female officials around them. Although they didn't see any restraints and weren't like those horrible spinsters in the Qing dynasty in their previous life, these women were always loyal and stupid, and they would never let their masters get close to any dangers. Fan Xian got a little impatient and gave a wink to Fan Ruorua. Fan Ruorua understood, smiled, stood up, and said to Yi Linger, since it's out of order, let's go. After all, this place isn't like the rest of Kyoto. Yi Linger really couldn't withstand the provocation, and jumped up, giving the old grandma a scolding. Fan Xian frowned as he watched, thinking that this little girl's temper was really too violent, and he didn't know who would teach her a lesson in the future. At this time, Fan Ruorua pretended to persuade the aggrieved old man to sit down at the table, and handed her a cup of tea to drink. A while later, the old sister suddenly changed her face and hurriedly left. At this time, Miss Lin's eldest maid came out from the inner room hearing the sound, and seeing that the old sister wasn't there, she welcomed the three of them in. Yi Linger was not stupid despite her temper, and glanced at Fan Xian suspiciously. Fan Xian half lowered his head and said nothing as he followed. He was always carrying something that no one else could think of: laxatives, ecstasy, and aphrodisiacs, all of which were in his hand, as well as daggers, crossbows, and 5 bamboo weapons, all of which were his 3 major protective treasures. With these things with the side, it can be said that the world can go. Entered the Lin family lady boudoir. Fan Xian lowered his head, do not dare to have half a bit of movement, only the nose came burst of fragrance, only to know that the room is lit on the plateau of the unique spices. This spice helps the patient to rest the spirit of quiet recuperation, only the fragrance is too strong, will be the lady boudoir should have the flavor of the powdered flavor of the wash talked about a lot of. Yi Linger said something after entering the mantle, and then Fan Ruo went in again. Fan Xian used his energy in his ears, and heard clearly that his sister was greeting the girl, but the girl just coughed a few times, and seemed to have some shortness of breath. Fan Xian sketched the scene inside in his mind, wondering how the two of them would look when the younger sister-in-law first met her new wife. Once he thought about this, Fan Xian realized that he did have some heartflowers, obviously loved the white girl who was chewing on a chicken leg, but today, when he entered the Lin family's young lady's room and smelled the fragrance, he began to fantasize about what the blush on the Lin family's young lady's face would look like. "Mister, please come in," Yi Linger invited on behalf of her host. Fan Xian straightened slightly and lifted the mantle to enter.